The disclaimer is that we're going to record the meeting tonight. We're planning to put it up on YouTube. If you choose to speak or attend in person, we are going to record your voice, your face, anything you choose to say. If you don't want to participate in that, please text Ryan or me, and we will share your comments if you guys are all here in person. If you don't want to turn your camera on, that's totally fine. You can type in the chat. So just be aware that we are recording your likenesses, and we will be posting them quickly.
I'm not sure anyone ever has gone to a recording, but it's there.
It exists.
So thank you.
We had a quick, I don't want to interrupt too long, but we had a 2 to 3 minute video from our OU2 tour. And we were thinking of trying to share that. Is that something that we could throw up real quick?
It is, but it can't be while we're recording, because since these get posted publicly on YouTube, we can't show the video.
Maybe at the very end?
Yeah, I think we can do it at the end.
Oh, that's a great.
But
Yeah,
that's
good. We'll do that at the end.
Oh, thank you for doing that. Okay, so we have 2 main agenda items for tonight, both at the CAG's request from last time. First of all, we'll have a quick update on operable Unit 1 and what's going on, but then our main focus is going to then turn to a request to have EPA and Sarah Ray, the attorney for the site, explain a bit more about how Superfund works in terms of recovering financial liability from certain property owners in certain circumstances. And it's been starting to happen, and there were a bunch of questions last time, and so we're going to spend some time talking about that. And the CAG has posed some questions about that, and so this is a conversation back and forth as well as information from Sarah. And so Sarah, I think, has until 6:30, so we're going to do that first, and then at 6:30 we're going to transition to part 2, which is Treat from Sitio at the CAG's request, talking about how we go from the interim record of decision in OU1 and operable Unit 1 to the final record of decision, and what that means, and in particular what that means for properties that maybe didn't get covered as part of the expedited work in OU1 because they didn't have folks living there, and what happens to those types of properties in the final ROD process. So that's part 2. As always, we can adjust the agenda a little, but because we have these 2 presentations tonight, I'd ask that we try to stay mostly on time for those, out of respect for your time and everyone's time. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll talk about what other topics are on the deck for next time.
Sure.
Good? Any other major things that you want to make sure are covered, or we have time for announcements at the end? If anyone from the public wants to say anything, we'll make time for that, so just let me know. And then lastly, I'll just say, in terms of how we operate, and many of us have been here for a long time, much longer than I have, but reminder when things come up that are hard and that are controversial and that are difficult, which they always will because it's a community and there's a lot of, these are big things happening and people have a very strong stake in them. This is about the issues, not the people. Let's not personalize. We're in this together, and that would be my request. And I think that's what I got. So I think with that, I'll turn to Beth. I think you're starting.
Yeah, is it okay? I just want to go pull the work stuff out of the door out there. I realized I put it out there. And I
You know what? You start. I'll go
Okay,
I'll
great.
go
Thank you. I'm sorry. I just didn't.
You're good.
Forgot to do that. Is the volume okay for folks online?
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you,
So,
Renee.
We usually go through a numbers update for OU1 residential properties. I wanted to check with y'all, is that helpful when I go through 96%, 82%, you guys like those? Okay, nodding. So with that,
Nodding affirmative.
excellent. We are 96% complete for soil sampling, which I think is an outlandishly good number. We usually, our residential sites don't get above 90% for soil sampling because it is voluntary. We can't force anyone to do it. So to me, that's a super good number. For residential dust sampling, we are at 83%, and we have been getting more people that are signing up for that dust sampling. We did recently send out some certified letters to folks, really encouraging them to sign up for dust sampling because it's letting us in their homes. We've had less people signing up for that, so we did send out the first set of letters, but without a last call date because we still haven't set that date officially yet. So we just said, hey, we really encourage you to sign up. Please do that. And then when we have a last call date, we'll send out a second set of certified letters to those dust sampling properties. And then going to the cleanup side of things, still all residential. For soil cleanup, we have 92% of these cleanups completed. And then on dust cleanup, we have 80% completed. So I'm pretty happy with those numbers. I feel like in the time that I've been here, we've seen them like slowly ramping up. So that's, to me, really good news. And I did want to mention something that Sabrina just brought up today for the remedial action contract. That's for actually doing the cleanup at the properties. We had an end date for, I believe, next year, Sabrina? Was that when it initially was?
Yes, it was December of
initially-
2024, and in order for our contractors on the cleanup to have an observation period of 1 year, and we call that operational and functional, make sure our restorations are functioning like we want, we have to finish our cleanups 1 year in advance. So we would have had to be done by December of 2023 to have 1 year of eyes on to make sure that our restoration is working like we want it to.
Yeah.
So we have a little bit more planning time and completion time.
So what that means now is that the contract has been extended until May of 2025. So we haven't yet talked about our internal strategy for soil cleanup, dust cleanup, but that does give us more flexibility to extend that last call to get more people to sign up. So I just wanted to let y'all know the contract has been extended, and once we know more about like last call dates and what that actually like means for like applying, we'll know more. But the contract exists, and I think that may also be able to help with some of the sloped properties. We've been doing investigations into them and working with the Army Corps to see what is technically feasible, since some of those angles are pretty steep. So that investigation is ongoing. I think Sabrina's going to walk with you tomorrow at your property. Harris, sorry, just for everyone, I was looking at Harris. I apologize for like the online component, but that is ongoing. So we're hoping to see a little bit more about what's feasible there. And I will briefly pause before I go into my next set of updates. Any questions on that bit?
This is Eric talking. I just, was wondering on the indoor dust sampling, what was the percentage or the rate of houses? Like how many houses have you tested and how many were contaminated and required cleanup?
That is a great question. I think,
Is that 35% right now?
let me pull it up. I know that it's in the update that we sent out. Yeah, that's exactly this. So for dust cleanup, 65% do not need a cleanup and 35% do need a cleanup.
And so,
Indoor, yeah, so this is soil and then this is.
So the soil is 43 and
Yeah, so the yes is the pink.
and early on, just to remind folks, when we were closer to where the smelter was in the middle of the site, we had about 49% of properties looking like they needed a soil cleanup, and it was closer to 40% of the properties needing an indoor dust cleanup. As we move away from where that smelter was and where we think the stack was emitting contamination and it was falling out, and then potentially having the tracking from soils into homes, as you move away from that source area, it makes sense, the percentage drops down.
So, thank you, Sabrina. The next update that I am really excited about, that I think we'll be ready to share next month, is we've been working on a tool that I think you guys are really gonna like. It shows, like, you can dig deep into the data for residential properties. So you can search by property and see, has it been tested, has it been cleaned up, what's needed, and so you can like click and you can highlight like this section of properties. It's really, I think it's pretty interactive, and it's a lot easier to use than like the map that we print out in that thing. So it's still going through like some beta testing right now. We released it to PDPHE, or sorry, the Pueblo Health Department and the Colorado State Health Department to let them kind of look at it and see how it goes. And I think by November it should be ready to release to y'all and then share broadly with the public. Because I think also for realtors, if anyone wants to look at a property and see, has this been tested, has it been cleaned up, they can easily do that from this dashboard. So I'm really excited about it. I can't wait for you guys to see it. So just kind of a teaser, more to come on that, but hopefully we'll have it ready for you. It's called Click Dashboard, like QLIK, but we should have that out here in a minute.
will that be linked into the assessor's site and all that, so that it'll follow, is that how we're gonna follow the?
I think that the
paper trail?
assessors have a different, I think that the ordinance is going to be linked with the assessors because the assessors have like their process, but it's going to be like a supplement to that, I think, so that people, as they are buying a house and they're doing their due diligence, they can look at this tool and say, hey, is my house even in the study area? And if it's not, great, like, yeah, go ahead, Sarah. Please, yeah, Sarah, great.
On the ordinance piece,
But Sarah, can you remind everyone your role in the ordinance?
Sorry, you have a soft voice, I'm sorry. You're good.
I'm Sarah with the state. The reason that I'm speaking up is because it's the institutional control that kind of rolls over with the end of the project when EPA is no longer involved and kind of state takes over. It's that part of the ordinance administration is also sticking with the city and the state. And as far as the data goes, that's right. Like there are other pieces to ensuring that we have accurate maintenance of the data, but it's the same data. So the state has, or the city has expressed interest in how it's gonna look, how it's gonna be maintained, and how they're gonna be able to look it up. And I think this database or something similar is the idea, like the city folks that get a building permit and they have to check, will have kind of a database to look into it that's easy and user.
It seems like it's the answer to Terry's
Yeah.
many questions on
Yeah.
this avenue, so
Yeah.
that's great.
One of the questions is.
Yeah.
What, not all of them, Terry?
All of them. I'm here for all of them.
I will say I've used this before in other projects when I was in my other region, for big residential websites, and it's just really helpful, because if there's a question, if like someone new's coming to town, or if you're just even like looking to buy different property or something, you're like, what's the status of this? Like, has this house been tested? Am I even in the Superfund site? And what will be really nice is that y'all can like search any address you want, and it'll say like, it'll have the soil cleanup status where it says, no cleanup required, cleanup completed, or it'll say NA because it hasn't been tested. And then you'll be able to scroll over, and it'll have a whole soil, indoor dust column as well. That'll say like, not tested, waiting on results, or already clean. So it like gives you that like straightforward question that we get a lot from realtors, or people just in general wanting to know like what's going on with this property. A lot of people like who move into the houses and like, oh, we didn't know, like, has this been tested? And it's like, here you go, this is open, do as you please. You know, it'll be a really nice feature to have.
So I think you guys are gonna like it, but we'll share the link as soon as we can, and if we can, I think I'd like to release it to y'all at the time before we like do the big broadcast public, so you guys can look at it, and then as our like stewards in the community, you can make sure that people see it and know how to use it, so more to come.
And if y'all, I guess when we do, sorry, Austin, when we do release it, if y'all have questions, you can just ask me, and I can even like set up like a 5-minute tutorial that walks through like how you search the database and how to read it. It should be pretty straightforward, but I've been like staring at it for 6 months, so it seems like straightforward to me. But if there are questions, like happy to give a demo on how this works and anything like that.
That's definitely a good idea. Velma?
You know, just incidental comment to the idea of when the map is ready for rollout, we'd be at the organization of volunteer with mothers at front would be happy to help publicize and coordinate a public meeting like that.
I think that'd be great. Yeah, I think it's, I really like this tool.
Co-sponsor.
I think it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
Great news.
I'm
I'm gonna move
Maybe we
along.
could get the.
Yeah, well,
get the
yeah, so
library
can I move to,
Yes.
I'll do my next quick update, because I know we only will have about 30 minutes with Sarah, so I wanna do quick updates. Commercial sampling is still happening, they're proceeding along, they are sampling soil at the properties, and we are getting ready to send out like the first set of commercial results, so that is happening. And then on OU2, the sampling is kind of continuing as expected. They did their first like pulling of the groundwater samples, I think, this past month, and they are continuing to do the biota sampling. So I think that'll be done October-ish, November-ish. So should be done soon here. And then on reuse, I know we've been talking about this a lot, and I think, as far as I understand it, there have been some interviews with the city and the property owners, and so our next step is to have a planning meeting with y'all at the CAG to kind of talk through what we want to do when we do go to the big visioning event. So I think that visioning event is targeted for next year, but we're gonna have a planning session with y'all and then go into that OU2 visioning session.
And one thing I want to tack on to that last piece is you all provided pretty detailed input on what you would like to see and what you recommend to Sitio, which is helping EPA with the visioning event, and also the pre-event meeting with you all in the city and private property owners. That is documented. Sitio has that, EPA has that, it's being tracked. I just want you all to know that when Sitio talk to you about, okay, here's the status of things, they are not gonna ask you that again, they already have that, and they're gonna say to you, here's what we heard from you, does this sound like a good plan going forward? So, just so it's on the radar.
Good.
Okay.
Cool.
All right, and updates are done. Any final questions on the updates so far? Because then we're gonna go right into the enforcement discussion with Sarah. Good? Sarah Ray, I think we're turning to you, and as you know, this was discussed last month. The CAG shared some thoughts and questions and concerns. I think you've seen those notes, and I know you've talked to the team, and I know that the CAG and steering committee provided you some questions that they have. So I think folks would love to hear from you.
Sure, great. Hi, everyone. I know they mentioned I have a hard stop at 6:30. I have a toddler. I need to get in the bath and to bed on time. So given that we have about 30 minutes to cover this important topic, I prepared some talking points in light of the questions that were passed along from the last CAG meeting. So I propose to kind of just go through those talking points, try and do it in like 10 minutes or so, and then we can have some time to answer any questions. If there's additional questions or any of my talking points didn't address some of the existing questions. And I'll just check volume is good. You all can hear me?
Yeah, it's good. Can everyone hear?
Great.
Sort of.
Great.
Right, even if you can talk a tad bit louder, that would
Louder?
help.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't screaming into the room. So I think I presented to this group in August of 2022. We did kind of an overview of Superfund enforcement at that time. I don't think we had a lot of examples that we can point to. So my hope is we can kind of walk through that overview as well and talk about the enforcement tools that we have available. And now also kind of point to specific examples as we talk about those enforcement tools and the Superfund process overall, since some of that information is now publicly available and we're able to talk about it. I'll start out by just saying that the enforcement investigation for the site is ongoing. That includes operable unit 1 and operable unit 2. In an effort to maintain transparency, I'm going to share as much as I can, but I just want to remind everyone that there are constraints due to confidentiality issues that prevent me from sharing all of the specific details. That really comes down to the federal rules of evidence that dictates that any of our settlement discussions are confidential. But I do want to point out that even though community members can't participate in settlement discussions, there are many opportunities for public input or public involvement and transparency. So I think I want to point to some of those examples. I think a broader tool that we have at this site is the Colorado Smelter Community Involvement Plan that kind of just governs community involvement at the site in general, not specific to enforcement. But when we do turn to enforcement specific topics, we do often in our consent decrees or settlement agreements at any of our Superfund sites, we're required to do public comment periods. I'm sure you're aware we just went through that for the cash out settlement agreement that was proposed with the LLCs. That is 1000 South Santa Fe LLC and 1100 South Santa Fe LLC, where the registered agent is Cecil Brown. These are properties within operable unit 2. So we had that 30-day public comment period recently. We published that in the Federal Register, notifying the public that the public comment period was available. This is how you submit comments. I believe Beth sent out an email to the CAG and the community members to advise that that public comment period was open in an effort to just get the word out so as many people could have access to the settlement agreement, take a look at it and submit public comments if they felt appropriate. That closed on the 25th. We, I think, granted a 2-week extension at the request of the CAG, and we got 3 public comments. So the next step in that process is that we prepared a response to comments. We summarized all of the comments, prepared responses. I'm working on getting that posted to our website so folks can see those responses. I'm hoping early next week, once it goes through our records department, it can get on the website. And we concluded after reviewing those 3 comments that we didn't receive any comments that were inappropriate, improper, and inadequate, which is the legal standard. So as of October 5th, just a few days ago, the settlement is effective, and we have notified the respondent that the settlement is effective and that the response to comments will be on the website shortly. Another example for transparency that I would point to too, as Beth mentioned in her overview, is these visioning sessions for redevelopment and reuse. EPA has this great resource at this site that we were able to get that seed money from headquarters to be able to support those visioning sessions. So that's also a great opportunity for the community to be involved in, not necessarily enforcement, but reuse and redevelopment as another opportunity for transparency and public input. I think lastly, I'll just say that as we move through the enforcement process, more information becomes publicly available. So I can commit, I didn't realize it had been such a long time since I presented last. When I was looking back at my notes, it was August of 2022. So I can commit personally to, as more information becomes available, we work through the enforcement process, I'm more than happy to participate at more of the CAG meetings. We can figure out what timing makes sense, but absolutely willing to offer that as to increase transparency and communication between EPA and the CAG. My next topic I wanted to cover is just enforcement and investigations in general, not specific to this site, but just that it's a normal part of our Superfund process. I think I really reiterated that a lot in my August 2022 presentation. This really ensures that the burden of paying for these costly Superfund cleanups does not fall solely on the general public. So typically our first step in our enforcement investigation at any of our Superfund sites is doing this PRP search. A PRP is a potentially responsible party, and we use this term PRP search in accordance with EPA's guidance, and we have a manual on this. And this really is just looking at historical documents, doing title searches, sometimes sending out 104E information request letters to individuals or companies. Assessing if anyone within the Superfund site falls within those 4 categories of someone who could be potentially liable. It's really a comprehensive desktop analysis to see if we can identify any potentially responsible or viable, with viability meaning financially. Can they pay a limited amount? Can they pay some amount? Can they pay no amount towards cleanup? So that's really the first comprehensive step in our enforcement investigation at any of our Superfund sites. So I'll pause there, I think, and then I was next going to go into kind of some of the tools available, but I feel like I'm giving a lot of information at once. So maybe I'll pause here as like a breaking point and see if anyone has any questions so far before going into some of our enforcement tools that we utilize at Superfund sites.
Anyone have any questions or comments at this point before going on? And we can always circle back. Okay, go ahead, Josh. I don't see any questions.
Okay, great, thanks. Sorry, it's hard to tell. So again, I'll talk about quickly just some of the tools that EPA has available in our enforcement toolbox. And this again applies more generally, not just specific to this site, but just all of our Superfund sites and across the country, all of our regions. We have cash out settlement agreements. This is where you have reimbursement, where taxpayer dollars have been used to sample and clean up the site. And we're seeking cost recovery or reimbursement for that. A perfect example is the settlement that I just mentioned with the LLCs. That was a cash out settlement agreement to bring in cost recovery for money that has already been spent at the site to clean up, to sample, again, to kind of alleviate that burden on the taxpayers for these expensive Superfund cleanups. Another example in our toolbox is agreements to perform work. That is a potentially responsible party can actually be under an agreement to do some of the sampling or do some of the cleanup themselves at the site. A great example we can point to is the Union Pacific Railroad Company. I think last year in 2022 or in late 2021, we came to an agreement administratively with Union Pacific to do the sampling within the railroad right-of-way. And they recently just completed that and submitted the data to EPA for that sampling under that administrative settlement agreement. So that's another example that's specific to this site, one of the tools that we have in our enforcement toolbox to utilize where we can have a potentially responsible party doing the work instead of EPA. The third example I want to cover is Superfund liens. This is another mechanism that EPA can seek cost recovery, again, to alleviate that burden of these costly Superfund cleanups. So it's not solely on the taxpayer. I can point to specific examples here actually at the site now that this is publicly available. We have perfected Superfund liens at 6 parcels within operable unit 2. 4 of the parcels are by the big slag pile that are owned by John and Mary Starr. And these are recorded in the county assessor's office. And then 2 of the parcels we perfected liens on that were owned by the LLCs. And as a part of the settlement agreement that I was just talking about that went out for public comment and is now effective, EPA is going to agree to release those Superfund liens upon the payment of that settlement amount. So those are the 6 parcels. We kind of went through that process. I really want to take a moment to kind of explain the process for EPA's enforcement when we perfect Superfund liens. By statute, the authority for EPA to perfect the liens exists. But we don't just go and perfect a lien. There's pretty a lengthy process before we get to that point. Typically that involves numerous notifications of potential liability, that costs have been sent at the site, a notice of intent to perfect Superfund lien, an opportunity for that property owner to object to EPA's intent to perfect a Superfund lien, and also the opportunity to request a hearing before a neutral EPA official. And we worked through that lengthy process with all 6 of those liens before they were perfected, and had 2 hearings before a neutral EPA official, and then waited for the recommended decision from the neutral EPA official before perfecting those liens. So I really want to just highlight that so it doesn't seem like it's really thought through. It's a part of our enforcement process, and there's a lot of steps that go into it before we decide to perfect a lien. And then there's also the procedural steps as well that we go through before perfecting a lien. And it looks like Sabrina, you have your hand up, so go ahead.
Can you just explain the classes of PRPs a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, we covered that last time, so I wasn't sure if we wanted to go back over that again, but just kind of a highlight of 4 classes of a potentially responsible party. And we have a lot of research on our information on our webpage too, but current owners or operators is the first group. The second group is going to be past owners or operators at the time of the waste disposal. You also have generators and you also have transporters. So those are the 4 categories of potentially responsible parties. And I think we get the most questions on that first group, which is current property owners. That's pretty much anyone who owns property within the site study area or site boundary kind of falls into that first category as a potentially responsible party.
Sarah, if a responsible party does not pay the agreement as like agreed in the settlement, what happens to their property?
Are you talking about the specific settlement agreement with the LLCs?
Affected, yeah.
Yep. So I don't have the terms in front of me, but the way it is, like, EPA agrees to release the lien after payment of that settlement amount or within 3 years. We kind of have, so it's like whatever comes sooner, if it's 3 years at the latest or once the property is sold. And I think Mr. Brown or Dan Brown was at the last CAG meeting and had mentioned that the property was previously listed for sale, and their requirements in the settlement agreement that require them to list it again, make best efforts to sell that property. And we can enforce the administrative order through referring it to the Department of Justice. If there was non-compliance with the terms of the settlement agreement, it typically doesn't get to that. These are agreements of consent. We negotiated for a very long time on an agreement that both parties felt were fair and reasonable. So we typically also have sometimes in our settlement agreements, I can't remember if this one is stipulated penalties, which are penalties if you fail to meet the terms of the agreement. I see that a lot in consent decrees is kind of something to encourage parties to comply with what they've agreed to. So we have many options if we do need to go down that path to enforce something if there's non-compliance with the settlement agreement. But I'm very hopeful that that is not.
Do other people, Sarah, did you want to say more? Are we pausing here for questions, or is that sort of the gist of what you wanted to share?
I had two more. I think I had 5 listed total. We've covered the first 3 kind of tools. I had 2 more that I wanted to cover. And then we could pause at that point if that makes sense.
Go ahead.
So the next kind of tool in our enforcement toolbox is ability to pay settlements. This could be an instance where we find a potentially responsible party, we notify them of potential liability, and they notify us, I am concerned I have an inability to pay, or like this just isn't gonna work. We work with that property owner, a potentially responsible party. There's a whole process, we call it ability to pay, or ATP. Give them a list of documents that they would need to submit to support their ability to pay claim. Work with our economists or financial experts in our region to kind of run our models, and just review the financial documentations to kind of determine if they qualify for an ability to pay settlement. And sometimes I've seen ability to pay settlements that say, no, this person does have assets, they're claiming this, but it's not supported by supporting documentation. I've also seen it on the other end of the spectrum where it's a really small amount that they're able to pay, and we can have an ability to pay settlement for that small amount. I've also seen in my experience at EPA saying documentation shows that they have an ability to pay 0. And that would just be that either a no cost ability to pay settlement, or we exercise our enforcement discretion to not pursue that potentially responsible party. So it really kind of depends on where the financial analysis lands, but that's a really important tool that we use in our enforcement process. And lastly, I'm just going to talk about enforcement discretion. I think we've mentioned before, or at least I mentioned before, is that enforcement discretion policy that EPA has that applies towards residential property owners that live or own property within a Superfund site. I've mentioned before that EPA, the caveat is that that policy does not apply to commercial or industrial properties. It really is specific to residential property owners within a Superfund site. But that's not the only enforcement discretion that the agency or any enforcement agency has. We also have our general enforcement discretion, and that really weighs into our enforcement investigation, how we're making decisions.
Looks like you're cutting out a little bit, Sarah.
Oh, okay. I'll just repeat that I was just saying, in addition to that enforcement discretion policy that applies to residential property owners, we also just have our general enforcement discretion authority, which is very broad. It just allows us to exercise enforcement discretion when we think it's reasonable and it makes sense. So we always have that umbrella kind of in viewpoint and tool available to us as we're doing our ongoing enforcement investigation. So I'll pause there for any questions. I know, again, that was a lot of information, but I wanted to kind of cover some of those really important tools that we utilize at our Superfund sites when we're trying to resolve liability with these PRPs.
So Sarah, is that, should we just open it up now to general discussion? Do you have more points you want to make before 6:30 when you have to hop off?
Sure. The last one, I just wanted to just kind of make the point, just that I know enforcement can sometimes get a negative perception, or just people point to, I think, the financial impact the enforcement might have on property owners within a Superfund site. I just want to emphasize, I'm sure you've heard that EPA is committed to encouraging reuse and redevelopment, and just share my viewpoint that enforcement, I think, can go hand in hand with reuse and redevelopment, and just give some examples. I think we've talked about this before, is we offer resources, our enforcement team, to prospective purchaser inquiry calls. I've participated in a handful of these specific to this site, where you have a prospective purchaser who wants to take advantage of liability protections, the bona fide prospective purchaser protection. And we can hop on a call and explain all of those legal elements that are required to be met before purchasing a property. And we also have tools like comfort status letters, which is kind of similar to those prospective purchaser inquiry calls that we have. It just puts things in writing, pointing to the resources that they would need, the elements that would need to be met to be able to purchase a property, protect themselves from Superfund liability, and be able to kind of go in and reuse and redevelop the land within the Superfund site. And again, I think I'll point to the settlement again with the LLCs. As I said, under the agreement, we're seeking cost recovery. We're going to get payment of that settlement amount and also agree to release those Superfund liens that are on the property. And this may help kind of the sale of the property to someone who may avail themselves of that BFPP liability protection and foster reuse and redevelopment at the site. So that was all I had. I know it's a lot of information, but hopefully we have about 15 minutes and we can answer some questions if there are any.
Thank you, Sarah. That was really helpful. And I wonder, I'm not seeing hands up, but do people have, whether, I don't think it just needs to be questions, but what you're sitting with, comments, whether this addresses or doesn't address the heartburn. Sarah? Yeah.
Well, I don't have any specific questions at the moment, and I apologize, sir. I've begun to find myself hard of hearing quite a bit lately, so I'm only catching what you're saying. So I'm going to listen to your presentation on the video later, and I might have other questions, but I guess my thoughts aren't in the nature of questions. It's just I don't like the process, pretty obviously. And the sheer fact that you spent a lot of time going through the various steps that allow you to determine whether there's liability or not liability, and then tools that might be allowed to be utilized to either mitigate or eliminate liability, tells me that there's a pretty strong recognition in the federal government that this is kind of a crappy system. At least that's my impression. You don't have to comment on that, because that's a legislative issue. And I appreciate that. But the other side of it is the reason why we raise it. Well, there's several reasons. One of which several of us spent quite a bit of time trying to get this area listed on the national list so that we could get a Superfund site here. We would have been probably more hesitant in doing that had we known that our citizens might end up being tagged in a process like this. Maybe that's shame on us. We didn't know the system as well, but we didn't. And we didn't have any of these conversations on the front end side. So that makes us feel a little bit uncomfortable in this community. Second side of it is the enforcement process throws one heck of a chill, a cloud over our ability to revitalize this area. And the thing is what we're trying to do is to get it cleaned up so that it's a healthy community, both in the residential area and the commercial area, so that our citizens can use it. And frankly, we're trying to handle the economic side of it as well, to get this area to recover economically. Knowing that there's this enforcement process out there chases away significant numbers, I would say the vast majority of anyone who would be interested in investing in the area. That is the reason why we are upset. It's not with you. We understand the system, but I'll go back to my first comment. The system stinks. And yes, I understand it. And I guess the problem that I have, if you were a polluter, I could see the liability. So even if you're a subsequent owner and a subsequent polluter, I'm okay with that. My thought is that's your own actions and you're responsible for your own actions. But someone who is simply liable because of the chain of title, and possibly, this is an old area and this is an old smelter site, it's possible that folks acquired their property before these particular federal laws were in place. And so any kind of argument of, well, it was caveat emptor, that's not true. It's not true if the law was not in place at the time that they acquired title, and yet they're caught up in it. Now, it's my understanding that these are all legitimate arguments that can be thrown in on behalf of the landowner to try to either mitigate liability or to avoid liability. I get all that. The only way you can do that is you're gonna have to lawyer up. And that means cost, expense, emotion, and everything else, all of which chills the very revitalization effort that we are trying to do in this area. It's one of the reasons why when we first heard about this a little over a year ago, and I think that you may have been part of the conversation, and I appreciate that. It's one of the reasons why we wanted to said, look, we need to slow down so we can, as an advisory group, can understand it a little bit better and see if there's ways to navigate this so that we can minimize the negative aspects, the chill effect that it would have on our revitalization efforts. Because we're frankly trying to speed up revitalization. We're not trying to slow it down. Speeding it up is the key. And so that's part of the challenge that we have. And maybe it's the fact that, that we were asleep in the process, but we've been trying to speed up the OU2 cleanup process. But I guess I did not realize the level of activity of the enforcement process yet. And so that is something, to the degree that you're allowed to let us know exactly where we are with all the various properties and which properties are under concern, which ones are not. If you can't share any of that, that's fine, but just tell us what you can tell us and what you can't tell us. And then we will try to navigate as best we can. And the second side of it is, I think I'm up to about 7 we have been working pretty closely with the City of Pueblo and with the Urban Renewal Authority here in town for this very reason, to revitalize the area and to see if those governments could possibly enter into some of the agreements that you may have discussed and I missed just now. Where we could transfer title either voluntarily or involuntarily through a revitalization urban renewal process and eliminate the cloud, eliminate the chill so that we can actually do a good job of revitalizing the area and actually get good investors in the area. That, when we first discussed it a little over a year ago, year and a half ago or whatever, I took immediately over to the city and I mentioned it to a few of the elected officials over there and encouraged them to get a hold of their legal counsel, their environmental legal counsel, and start looking into this. And I do not know what the status of that is because frankly, this caught me, a little bit out of left field. But I'm hoping to work on it some more. I do know that our Urban Renewal Authority is trying to work with us very closely right now to try to achieve what we're trying to achieve here. So I guess that's my issue is trying to figure out how to navigate this. I appreciate the fact that EPA has made some kind of currently an unwritten policy or written policy, I don't know what it is, on not prosecuting residential properties. I'm a lawyer and a politician. That tells me there's lots of doors that potentially open here. But if it can be done for residential, then there are lots of theories, some of which I think that you've talked about tonight, of ways to navigate this. But I guess that, that's my bottom line. I would love to, if it's possible, to slow it down, help us understand as much as we can about the process, help us understand what our opportunities might be, particularly if we were to route something through a revitalization process through an urban renewal authority or another government of some kind, and help us understand that and see if we can at least get a good dialogue going to trigger that very conversation. And I think that we can get that done if we know enough about it in order to make a case. And frankly, I feel totally ignorant right now. I don't think I could make the case, other than saying, golly gee, I wish this wouldn't happen. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
That's really helpful. I think I can, again, offer to participate more often. I didn't realize it had been a whole year since I had participated in one of these CAG meetings to share an enforcement update. I also want to point again to, I think a lot of what you're hoping to have, that open dialogue, I think fits perfectly within those OU2 visioning sessions that we're working on getting scheduled. And I know I'm looped into those too, so I can make sure if there's any enforcement discussions to participate in those as well. But it's really helpful.
What did you refer to when you said, that something could be addressed in the revitalization discussions? Did you refer to an acronym or something that
I think he had questions or hit comments that like just kind of a bigger discussion of like, if the city were interested in purchasing parcels, like those kind of questions. I don't have experience with that in the enforcement realm, but just to have an open dialogue and kind of understand what he's talking about more, I think to me, it kind of fits within that OU2 revisioning kind of aspirational, like what the community supports and what they would want to see for reuse and redevelopment. So to me, it kind of seems perfectly to fit within those types of discussions. But again, Sabrina, correct me if I'm wrong and if it fits somewhere else better.
No, I think that's spot on. I think the piece that we're still struggling a little bit with and trying to complete are the interviews with OU2 property owners. And so having them be part of the workshop before we have a larger community visioning and looking at what is it that community members see as possibilities, what is it that property owners see, what is it that perhaps urban authority and city planning or what have you, like where are that points of overlap and interest, or what are the constraints to overcome to get folks on a path that looks like it's the larger benefit. I think that, it's sort of the timing is right now for these sorts of things to happen, but it's going to
have our attention.
It's going to be really important to keep these property owners engaged.
Well, it is.
They still get to control
No.
the use of that property.
No, that's not true. Have you been through an urban renewal process?
And let me just say real quick, and before going down this rabbit hole, just that we have Sarah for 2 more minutes, I think.
Yeah, Velma had her hand up. Yeah, I saw Velma
Oh,
and then tree, and I just wanted to flag the time, that's all.
Yeah.
Okay. But I just want to make one point before we leave
and
what
then we go to
Serena said. One of the, Serena has told me several times that we definitely want to get the property owners involved. I don't disagree, but I don't think that is all stop all. And the reason is an urban renewal process is not always agreed to by the current landowners. That's the way it works. And the thing is you try to work with current landowners, and if the bigger vision is not consistent, then you go through a condemnation process. And that happens on a semi-regular basis in urban renewal. It's a reason why do I think that we should have them involved? Absolutely. Do I think that if they say we don't want to do this, is that the end of the dialogue? No, it's not.
Understood.
Velma, and
Yeah, just real briefly, I'm adding a little box to Terry's soapbox. My box is shorter than your box, but the intent with this enforcement, my understanding of the original intent of the EPA enforcement process for potentially responsible parties was to prevent major polluters or the significant polluters to the sites from being able to change company names or hand it off to their nephew or, just do all kinds of things that corporations often do to avoid responsibility. And in that sense, it's an understandable necessity. The problem is the actual polluters, in this case, we're talking Asarco and others, skate free and clear as corporations often do, leaving the vulnerable members of the community holding the bag when they had little or nothing to do with the actual pollution that's there. The people who, like our friend who was the subject of the previous conversation, has a family need to manage the thing, and they're victimized by a process that started out with a good intention, simply because they needed to get this taken care of, and they didn't see any help coming either from their government or from the community to help them out with this process. So, as Terry says, that's process victimizes those who can't afford to fight the process. And I have two comments. One
And Velma,
is,
can I just pause you real
Yeah.
quick? Sarah, are you able to, I know it's 6:30, are you able to stay for 2 more minutes? Or should we, otherwise we can record what Velma says and make sure you hear it.
You can stay on for a few minutes.
and I'll be quick.
And you, yeah, you'll
Yeah.
hop off in a minute.
I sometimes am not, but I will be. So, I guess one of my questions is whether EPA's current emphasis on environmental justice, on addressing the special needs of environmental justice communities, like Pueblo, which is a near majority racial minority community, low income, on the state environment screen, ranks highest of any county in the state in terms of risk of experiencing environmental injustice, whether there's anything in the emphasis within the agency that can be brought to bear on the approach to the enforcement process in environmental justice communities like Pueblo. I know that it's a new approach and we're still finding those intersectionalities, but it strikes me that this is potentially a really big one. I've seen this kind of situation numerous times in Louisiana as well, where low-income communities couldn't get sites cleaned up, but without a big struggle, and yet as soon as somebody turned up as a property owner, aha, the big gotcha. And so whether they had the money to address it, whether they were minority economically or racially, that I think is an intersection, needs to be looked at very seriously. And secondly, it concerns me when I begin to hear about the discussion of OU2, and I know that's transitioning into another part of the discussion, but from the enforcement standpoint, using avoidance of enforcement as a reason to bring down and I know it's not always, I know that there's a reason why in many of the neighborhoods where I did community organizing, the process was called urban removal, because all too often wealthy developers and municipalities got together and removed historically sensitive communities simply in order to build developments that would be impossible for the original residents of the community to afford. Your neighborhood could be declared blighted at any time simply because you've experienced the effects of redlining and other generational neglect. And then here would come the developers. Now, the OU2 is less developed, but that doesn't mean that those property owners don't have some generational interest that I would hate to see the EPA enforcement site be a hammer that's used to bring down urban removal if it's not, urban renewal if it's not in the interest of the community necessarily.
Those are really very thoughtful comments, and thank you for sharing. I know that we need to let Sarah go, and Treat has one final comment. Do you need Sarah for this?
Yeah, it's actually a question for you, Sarah, just because I know the CAG members are gonna ask me later. And I think it's one of the questions that you didn't specifically address. So they had asked in their questions to you, to give them the list of properties where, at the site where EPA has filed a Superfund lien, and you mentioned that there were 6 parcels. But the other piece they asked about was asking for properties, the number of properties where you sent the owners a notice of intent to file a lien. So I just didn't want to miss that. I think that was the one piece of the question that I didn't hear tonight.
Sure. So to date, the only property owners that have been sent the notice of intent to perfect lien were those 2 or technically 4 property owners, but it's the 2 LLCs, which are kind of related, and then John and Mary Starr, who own those other 4 parcels within OU2. So it's just those same 6 parcels that we're talking about between kind of 2 groups of related property owners that have received notice of intent to perfect lien, and then also went through that lien hearing process, and then we perfected the lien. But to date, we haven't sent out any other letters to property owners within OU1 or OU2 with intent to perfect Superfund lien.
Okay. Sarah, I can imagine we would have a longer conversation if you had more time, and I know we'll be seeing you in upcoming meetings, and so thank you for that. And I think we want to release you to go put your baby to bed in the bath.
Great. Thank you so much. Sorry to cut the conversation short, but again, I'm happy to participate in the upcoming months if additional questions or follow-up discussion is needed. So thanks, everyone.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I mean, I think before we move on, does anyone have anything that they want to just sort of come back to when we either to send us questions, follow-up questions to Sarah, or for future conversations, anything like that before we move on? Oh, Aaron, I'm sorry. I didn't see you. Go
No,
ahead.
I just wanted to add that that's not the only enforcement that these property owners are under, so they're also being enforced by code enforcement as well for the OU2, the unhoused population and the mess that's happening back there. So they're getting it from the city as well on that side, so that's something to keep in mind.
And I think EPA was only. Oh, sorry, I was just trying to respond to that.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm so like process oriented, my bad. But you can respond, go ahead, I'm sorry. That was
No, I
different.
think we had heard early on about one of those citations that the OU2 property owner was given, and it didn't really end up in anything that was helpful for the unhoused folks. They just ended up taking a bunch of personal belongings away, and people just came right back. And, you know, we talked about how difficult it is to just completely remove access to that area, because we can't fence it in, fences get cut. So it's part of a much bigger conversation that Amanda and others are trying to continue on the unhoused issue.
That is true. We need a long-term solution, not true.
Beth, Amanda, Terry, I honestly don't know who's up first, but go ahead.
That's why I was being sorry. I just had a quick comment to Terry, so I just need to, what I wanted to flag was that I appreciate your point about redevelopment. I think that I'd like to do a little more looking at enforcement and redevelopment, because I have seen a couple residential properties where enforcement has occurred and redevelopment has still charged along unaffected, but I want to do a little more looking, so I just wanted to flag that I will look a little bit more at that.
Well, I guess that's my only comment. I would love to take what we know now and what we don't know and kind of get ourselves together collectively to say, do we need to know more things? And then secondly, what are our options moving forward? And I may be wrong, but I do think, though I totally understand what you're saying. My daughter is an architect, and she talks to me constantly about gentrification and the damages that are caused by gentrification. So I get that. On the other hand, is if we have property owners that the only way that they can get out of under an enormous amount of liability is to go through some kind of a voluntary or involuntary revitalization process. Yeah, count me in. That's what I want to do. But I think I'm sensitive to your issues. But anyway, basically understanding what we can, understanding our options. As far as I can tell, I think, unless somebody heard something different tonight, that our best option would be to try to explore this ability to utilize the Urban Renewal Authority in order to have a global plan for where we're going. I know that that's complicated. I was taken aside by one of the CDPAG attorneys and I was advised, be very careful how you do that, because it can still create potential liability for the government. We don't want to do that. We don't want to transfer liability from the private owner to the government, to the local government, because that doesn't accomplish anything. So anyway, but it does sound like that is the potential way, and what I was advised was take your time, negotiate it, be very careful, make sure that you've got the expertise on your side that you need to do, and then start working with it, and then plugging in some of Sabrina's side, talking to local landowners and see if they would like to plug in voluntarily. And then taking a look at the urban renewal prospect, or perspectives. If those, that particular land isn't necessary for that urban renewal process and they don't want to participate, well, that's fine. They don't have to. We've done that before. There's a famous liquor store that is right next to the hotel that you guys usually stay in. That literally happened. They would not work through the urban renewal process, and so they cut them out. And so there's a liquor store still there that was supposed to be wiped out. But,
Well, Terry, I wonder,
Oh,
so in the interest of time and also in the interest of sort of wrapping this up, Paul, we'll go to you in a sec. Let's make sure we don't leave this meeting without a sense of what are the next steps, and maybe the next steps are part of this whole revitalization discussion and pre-workshop. So maybe that's where this all happens.
I just, thank everybody for that presentation. I think we're getting a better handle on what the enforcement is going to entail and what we're dealing with all this stuff. People in the Grove, and the Grove is not included in any of the urban renewal projects currently that they have going. But has every property within the Superfund site been researched?
No, I mean, mostly it would be on the, like, the former smelter area is kind of the core area where they look at where did contamination start and how did it get out. And so I don't think that any of this, like Sarah said, where they looked at that notice of intent, none of those OU1 commercial properties have had that look. There's the possibility that they could, but I think having this conversation, hearing concerns, and the fact that they've got, you know, they have a reasonableness review and what makes sense. I mean, I think that continuing to have this conversation and involving Sarah is really important.
A couple of commercial properties in OU2 in the Grove have asked me if they're in any danger of being reviewed and having any liability. And they want to know what the determination is, what specifically they should be anticipating based on the parent ownership and the enforcement regulations.
I think we can ask Sarah to try to clarify that more. What I understand is that the law, technically they could be liable under the law, and it's up to the discretion of whether or not it is pursued. So I'll ask her like what some of that picture is, if that's something we can share. It might not be something we can share, since that is like their enforcement process, but I will need to ask.
So I should just probably tell them that there's a possibility.
Maybe wait till you get the messaging.
Well, that, and I think if they're willing, talking with Sarah is the best, like, way forward.
So Beth, you'll follow up with Paul on that? Okay. Okay, excellent.
One of the, before
we have Rama and then we have you, but can you guys just like,
I think Amanda had her card up.
Amanda, yours was up, and then it went down.
Yeah, I think because we were trying to wrap it up, she just.
Can we go to Amanda first, because hers was up a while ago, and can everyone just do like 30 seconds or less? Okay.
I just want to go back to Velma's point about, the intent of what property owners want to do with their properties, and just to bring up that that's something that we're working through with the property owner interviews that we're doing with Sitio, and, working with property owners, city officials, and kind of trying to understand what their plan is for future use of the property, so that is something that's being taken into account.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say two things. One, with respect to your kind of second guessing yourself about the Superfund site process. The fact of the matter is, the only other option would be brownfields, which do not apply to residential property.
Not even
And
Superfund, I
since we,
brownfields aren't applicable to any Superfund.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is back when we were considering what to do with the area,
right.
the only other option would have been to apply for brownfields grants instead of going with a Superfund listing. But that wouldn't have helped us with the emergency facing us in terms of the residential lead contamination, because brownfields doesn't apply to residential property.
So you're telling Terry not to?
Yeah,
Don't
yeah,
do
don't
that.
second guess yourself, we didn't
That's
have
how,
a,
there were two of us that
the-
wrote the letter.
yeah, I know, and
One was
I
your,
remember, yeah.
your husband.
And we didn't really have a choice because we were facing residential contamination.
No, but the way I
Yeah.
operate is I feel guilty a little
A
bit,
little
but I'm saying
guilty,
move
yeah, I know.
forward. 'cause we
But,
don't get
and the second thing,
A healthy little.
yeah, the second thing I wanted to say was that I wasn't just speaking philosophically about the environmental justice process. I recognize very strongly, and to anybody who has like connections at the upper echelons, with the degree of, what's the word? The flexibility that EPA has, the discretion, thank you, that EPA has in deciding what to do with enforcement situations, particularly with some of the small property owners. We're not talking about the original polluters. I really believe that environmental justice factors ought to be brought to bear, particularly for like the historic neighborhoods, like Paul's talking about, and even some of the property owners in the other parts of OU2. This whole community is designated an environmental justice community. There's no reason that the vast majority of property owners in this community should be subjected to enforcement unless they were one of the original smelter owners or their descendants.
And Velma, I don't think you sounded theoretical when you said it to Sarah, like,
No.
I think you sounded it sounded
Yeah.
consistent with what you just said.
But not considering that, I think could be considered arbitrary and capricious determinations and should be taken seriously.
Do you have a 30-second final thing here?
Well, to the extent I do.
You have 30 seconds, okay. Are we good? Okay, but I'm sensitive about like keeping that, okay, yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I like that. I think I would love to have us explore that. But secondly, one of the reasons why, why we're having this conversation is, maybe a shame on us, but as much courtesy notice as we can get, because everybody knows that we're working on this thing. And so what I would hope is everybody who's on the enforcement side, there's no legal limitation that I'm aware of going beyond what the minimal requirements for notice are. The reason why I know that is because we did that on a regular basis when I was county attorney in my county. And so I would ask that anything that we can be provided notice with, we be provided that notice as a courtesy, in addition to the minimal statutory or regulatory notices that are coming in, because that will help us do our job. Just enough said.
Duly noted. Terry?
I just got a quick question. I noticed, I guess I'm looking at the full map in front of me, but, question, why are the commercial owners within the OU2 footprint, being tasked with paying to settle their liens and so forth, and the St. Mary's Church is not? The St. Mary Church eats up, they're definitely sitting on the original footprint, and they use the bricks from the original smelter to build their school, which is a 5-story, so why are they not included in the, it seems kind of, when you're talking about handling one person different than another, they've got more money than God, so.
I know they work on it.
Exactly.
Yeah, we can look into it, I don't have a good answer.
I think
That would be a good argument, actually, I think, for the stars and for.
Do you have
I have what I think is like half of an answer, so I would need to check with Sarah for the full answer, but my understanding of the answer is that those properties were up for sale, and that's why the liens were protected. So those properties, both the Brown properties and the SAR properties were listed for sale, so that kind of triggered enforcement people to look at them and be like, what's going on over
They
there?
might not have ever had a problem with it.
I don't know for sure, that is
That's
actually,
the partial
I
part of
think-
your answer,
I-
yeah.
that's the half part that I'm like,
Yeah, and part of the equation is if we put a bunch of money in, potentially millions of dollars into characterization and cleanup, and then they were to have a windfall on the increase in value of that property, the taxpayers should see some of that windfall.
Agreed. Well, shouldn't we make sure we're gonna have a windfall first? You don't even know that that's gonna happen, so you're doing that. $750,000 is a lot of money.
They do a lot of valuations before they get into these settlements.
But
They sell Catholic churches in this town all the time.
Mm-hmm.
No, I can name a half a dozen that within the last 5 years.
do you want, I mean, I can
follow up with Sarah, if that's okay.
Well, that's fine, I was just,
Like, I
I mean, it was just a question, because it seems like you're picking on some landowners and not others, so it just seems. like
Okay,
it's-
well, that's, I think about, that's a question noted here.
So I
for
have
follow-up.
I'll do that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the opening line in the letter should be, can you afford multi-million-dollar attorneys, or shall we just come get your money now?
I'm putting that in the notes, so. Herrick, are you good?
Oh,
with
yes,
that?
I'm sorry.
Okay, any other final, this is great, I mean, I think this is a really helpful
Oh,
discussion.
can I ask the CAG member the question? When we use the term enforcement, like, I think we've talked about it enough now, like, are y'all tracking what we talk about? Because I know it's like, before I started working at EPA, I did not really know what that meant. Now I do, like, when we use it, y'all are following what we're talking about, like, it's pretty.
Or is there a better?
Yeah, or is there another
plain-
phrase that you prefer for us to use? I just, because I know, like, we use it a lot when we have the notes and everything. Do you have any issues with it? No. And yeah, I was like, that's the term that we generally use, so as long as like the term we're using lines up with how y'all understand it. Great, no concern. Thank you.
All right, so the second big topic we had time for was to come back to treat at your request to talk about IROD's ROD. So treat, should just pass it to you, I know you have the slide.
Like, spell out IROD for the visitors, okay.
And I did before too, but why is you gonna do it again?
No problem. So we're good to go? All right, so, this is a revamp of a presentation I think we did back in January of 2019, maybe. And I think you all, as we were kind of starting to talk about this issue, asked to kind of revisit it. So, it's mostly what you've seen before, but a couple of little updates and a little bit added information. So, I'm just gonna start here. We're gonna take a look backward and forward. We're gonna just basically look at the Superfund process and where things are at Colorado Smelter. A little bit about Superfund and community involvement and upcoming Superfund activities. And I know we've got some folks here who were not here before, so a couple of things I know for those of you who've been around are gonna be repeats, but I wanna make sure I cover them. So I'm coming to you as part of the Technical Assistance Services for Communities program at EPA. And it's one of several EPA-sponsored technical assistance programs, and they have a contract with Sitio, the company I work for. So we've done a bunch of work for you all, including a couple of different summaries and pamphlets, and we help EPA with some outreach material, et cetera. And then we're here, as many of you have seen, when you've got questions, you ask EPA for assistance from us, and then we meet with you and help go over a few things. So let's start with the Superfund process and where things are at Colorado Smelter. So this is a diagram. It's a little hard to see on that screen. Let me see if I can just walk you through it a little bit. This is the Superfund remedial process in general. It starts with this assessment phase, which is complete at this site. This is the part, Terry, you were talking about a little bit today, where there was the discovery of the issue, there were some preliminary assessments, and that ended up in a place where the site is listed on the National Priorities List, or the NPL. And then you move from there into a characterization phase, where you do the remedial investigation, a feasibility study, and a proposed plan. I'm going to talk about this generally, and then we'll talk a little more specifically about what happened here at Colorado Smelter. From there, generally there's a selection of the remedy, and that comes out in what's called a record of decision. You move from there to the cleanup phase, which includes remedial design and then the remedial action. So designing how the cleanup is going to happen and then doing the cleanup. After that, you've got a post-construction phase, which is the operation and maintenance phase, and eventually you end up in NPL deletion. Throughout there, you've got 5-year reviews that occur. I think that's just a little bit of an overview of that general Superfund remedial process. Throughout that process, there's community involvement and planning, and community involvement and planning for the site's eventual reuse or continued use is an integral part of that. So I think you've all seen that sort of throughout a lot of these phases, okay? So from there,
And Treat, can we pause and
Yeah.
if anyone has any questions? Any of the folks sort of visiting tonight for the first time?
and we're gonna talk about each of those things a little bit more
Okay.
specifically too. So
Great.
that's just sort of the big picture overview, and then we'll talk about them in a little more detail as they work out here, okay? All right, so this is just a map of the site that you all have seen a lot of times, right? We've got the former smelter area in the center, and then we've got the residential the other residential and community properties surrounding that with the different neighborhoods that have been impacted. Just so we all know what we're talking about. I know most of you are pretty familiar. So when we talk about operable unit 1, that's been referred to as community properties, it includes properties that are adjacent to that former Colorado Smelter historical footprint. So just to come back here, of course it wants to reboot my system while I'm giving a presentation.
Been there, done that.
So again, we're talking about the properties that are adjacent to and expanded out from this former smelter area, okay? So when we're talking about operable unit 1, or you'll hear it referred to as OU1, it includes those properties that are adjacent to the former Colorado Smelter historical footprint. That includes homes, vacant properties, commercial businesses, schools, parks, right? It includes all those different types of things. I know that we often have been talking about all the residential cleanups, and so sometimes we forget that there's those other properties that are included in operable unit 1. So something different happened here at operable unit 1. Because there was found to be a more immediate risk and concern about exposure risk for people who were particularly living in homes within the Superfund site, EPA went through, and when they got to this characterization phase, they actually selected an interim remedy, right? So they selected what we call the IROD, which is an interim record of decision, right? And they moved from that IROD to a cleanup phase. They designed the remedy, and they moved through to the remedial action. And then what's happening is throughout that process under the IROD, they're continuing this characterization phase, right? So as they've been sampling properties as part of the IROD cleanup, they've been sampling properties. That information is all going into a continued characterization. In addition, they're also collecting additional information at additional properties. So not just at the residential properties right now, but they're starting to do sampling and other remedial investigation at the other properties, right? So if we think about this process, basically they're gonna loop back around and continue with characterization so that they can move through and finish selection of remedy for the entire operable unit 1. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about that, but I'll pause here and see if anybody has any questions about that. So this is that we're going from an IROD, looping back around and coming back to the part of the decision, the part of the Superfund process where the characterization is happening, and they're gonna be moving into that selection of a remedy phase, okay? So this is the actual meat of that IROD to ROD, but we're gonna talk a little bit more about that. So basically, that IROD was really designed to get at the residential homes with the highest risk, and the other properties were really expected to be addressed outside the IROD, right? So sort of back into the loop of the regular Superfund process. And that said, you know, we've seen, especially in the last couple of months, we've seen some properties like Herrick's property that doesn't have homes on it, but is zoned residential, or the sloped properties where EPA is actively trying to figure out how to handle those more complex cleanup activities, right? And so, for example, we've heard on some of the sloped properties, we've heard that EPA may be able to address some of the flat areas of those properties while they look at how to deal with the sloped properties. So basically, that early interim action record of decision, that IROD, was really deemed necessary because the remedial investigation data showed that there was an increased risk of exposure to specifically lead and arsenic in the residential homes, and then in the dust in some of the homes, right? And so that IROD was selected to pick a remedy that would allow EPA to move forward and not have to fully complete the remedial investigation phase first. They could move forward with that. So that data and information, so basically they've been going along, they're still collecting data and information for that remedial investigation part, but they've allowed them to go through and clean up. Is that helpful? Because I think in talking to a bunch of you and kind of digging back in this myself, sometimes it's easy to think that OU1 is in the IROD, but it's not. It's only a part of OU1 that's in the IROD. And I think that that's the critical piece that is important to remember. So basically, you know, if the IROD is really only for the homes in OU1, or the places with the potentially highest and most elevated risk, how do we get to a ROD that's going to address the other properties, right? So this is that IROD to ROD. And so I just want to remind you again, I know we've seen this slide, but for me, I like it to be simple. I need to kind of go back to the basics. So basically, if we look at that list of properties that are inoperable Unit 1, we've got the homes, and that's what's dealt with in the IROD. But we still have vacant properties, commercial businesses, schools, and parks. Those are not dealt with in the IROD, right? So we're basically still at this characterization phase, right? So this is where we're in this loop, where we're, you know, the characterization has continued throughout this process. And EPA has gained a lot of information. They've also worked through over time on collecting a little bit more. In the past couple of years, they've talked about updating the conceptual site model, for example, and doing the ecological risk assessment, the human health risk assessment, right? So all those pieces are going on. And so basically, we're just back in this loop. And what we're gonna see is that as they're wrapping up those residential cleanups, they're still dealing with all this other information. And we should see from them their remedial investigation report at some point, right? Once they're able to get all of that data together. But that includes sampling that they're doing now with commercial properties, which, you know, there was limited amounts of that before, but they're doing that in more full force now. So basically, this is the path that we're on, and you will be back basically in that RIFS, you'll hear those terms, right? And proposed plan phases, moving to that selection of remedy. Does anybody have questions on that? I just want to go ahead, Velma.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the, as we have been going through the process here, a lot of times we're kind of told, well, you know, don't worry about that particular issue under the IROD. We'll deal with that when we get to the ROD, you know, or when we're in that characterization process. And so I guess I'm wondering, in general terms about the public process that goes forward, where are opportunities for general public input as well as our own? And also, what happens to the CAG's open questions? There are at least two that I can think of that we've sort of been told a soft no, but what we've really been told is put it off till the ROD. And I won't get into what the questions are per se, because what I'm really interested in is what's the process.
So that's where we're going to talk about next. Superfund and the community involvement. Thanks,
Well done.
Segue. I appreciate this setup. So I'm gonna give a little bit of information that I know you've heard before, but I'm gonna get to that. Oh, I'm sorry, Eric. Did you have a question before we went there?
It's pretty similar to Velma's, so,
Okay.
I mean, just make sure it's answered in the process. I mean, when do you ask those questions? Like, is there a point during the process that the EPA, like, say the question was, there was not, I do not believe that there was proper study done on the ductwork in the HVAC
That's another
units.
one, that wasn't one of
In
my
the,
two.
in the, is there a point where I could ask that question, we can ask it as a CAG, or actually just say, we don't believe that this is not a proper study that you did, and will it then have to be answered within that step of the process? Or if we ask those questions, do they have to be answered or not?
So you're gonna like part of the answer and not part of the answer, right? So I'll be real, let me go forward, and if I don't answer your questions, let's come back to them, okay? Because I think we're gonna cover them a little bit in here, okay? So again, we're just gonna talk a little bit about Superfund community involvement. I know we've got some folks who are not familiar, but basically, why is community involvement important? These things are, you know, basically people should have a say in decisions that affect their lives. People have important information that can inform decision-making, and we've seen that here specifically at this site. You know, years ago, we went through some of the information that helped shape things. Basically, community involvement results in better outcomes and cleanups, and, you know, local communities have information that helps.
Can you send that last slide to the enforcement division?
Yeah.
That's our point.
There you go.
And if you notice, this is a picture of the room we're in. Community involvement, communities do have a voice during all phases, and, you know, communities can be provided with educational materials, outreach activities, site information, training, technical assistance, other support. Here's the thing, this is where required public comments periods occur, and it's not that many in the process. The required public comment periods are when the NPL listing is proposed, which we're well past, when the proposed plan is published, which, if you remember the diagram we had up there, in that characterization phase, there's the remedial investigation, the feasibility study, and the proposed plan. So the required public comment period is once that proposed plan is released. And then when intent to delete from the NPL is published. So this gets a little bit at your question, which is, there's a push to have community involvement throughout the process, but the only technically required piece is when the proposed plan is released.
We were begging for that date all along, and now we're way past it. So, I mean, we were always told we'd have another chance before the rod in order to.
You will. So there will be a proposed plan before the final rod. But before the rod, we keep saying final rod, but it's not really a final rod. It's just the record of decision, right?
Is there a cleanup after you make a record of decision then?
Yes, yeah, I mean, depending on what the record of decision says, there's theoretically cleanup. So I'm not gonna lie to you, there's records of decisions out there that say no further action is required, right? That is a possibility in the realm of possibilities. But if you're in a situation where additional cleanup is needed, that happens after the rod, okay? So I'm telling you what's required official public comment period. But as you've seen, reports come out and are released, and there are often opportunities for communities to provide, like, there doesn't have to be an official public comment period for you, for example, as a CAG.
Well, it seems like it's got more bite during an official public comment period.
Absolutely.
Than it does when we just ask questions.
Absolutely. But, this is why I'm being real with you about where the official public comment periods are and where they're not. So, again, I'm just coming back to the picture to show you that in this characterization phase, right? So we're talking about the proposed plan here, and the phases after that are the selection of the remedy in the rod and the cleanup, okay? So that's where in the process. So again, what we're gonna see is we will see an RIFS, and I think Sabrina and the site team can speak to and keep you informed as to what their vision is for when that will happen. I don't imagine at this site that you will release an RIFS and a proposed plan all at the same time. No, that's unlikely, right? And we rarely see that. What we see is sometimes an RI and an FS come out together, sometimes they come out separately. And those are periods at which what we see through task, for example, is we often come in and review remedial investigation reports and provide a summary to the CAG, for example, and provide you with lists of questions that you might want to consider. And then you all can look at it and decide if you want to pass those things on. That is a point at which, Velma, you'll be able to talk about some of those concerns. There is not an obligation from EPA to respond to you at that point, but it does set up, and you can send that information in. Again, you've got the feasibility study, which is where they're talking about what they think is feasible at the site. Those two can come out together, they can come out separately. Again, I imagine, and please correct me if I'm saying anything that's wrong, but I imagine this site would share the feasibility study. And again, you're gonna have an opportunity to say, hey, we want help with this, we wanna look at this, let's have a technical advisor look at it, let's see what they're talking about, provide that more information. You may not get answers you like, right? You may not get answers to some of your questions, but it is another opportunity for you to chime in. And then the proposed plan, you'll be ready when that proposed plan comes out, you'll see the writing on the wall, you will be able to prepare to have your official comments go in, and then they have an official summary of the comments received, and they will respond to them. And again, this is what happens when you have the interim record of decision. Again, you all have shared that you did not like a lot of the responses, but it goes on the record there, right? Like that's an official place that you can talk, and there are options, and they will talk about all of this again. So in that rod, they don't just ignore what they've done before, they sort of have to restate it all. So all of those things that are in the interim record of decision will get back into that record of decision again. So it won't just be the other properties, they will revisit and talk about what they did in that interim record of decision and come to a place of, hey, here's our status. Oh, yep. Aaron?
I just wanted to add, to remind people that a lot has happened in lead in general in the past, few years. And so CDC recognizes it and the numbers are dropping. And so a lot of the other agencies are bringing down numbers as well. So this is, also something to keep in mind as time goes forward.
Yeah, and so.
Which is a weird time that it happened. We're
Right.
in the middle of it.
Right. Well, and so, for example, one of the things that you all have talked about and asked about is, what if EPA's policies change, right? So if they were to change before they get to this feasibility study and proposed plan, they would have to consider that at that point, right? So it's all about timing and how that works.
What's the status of that?
It's at the point where nobody knows, right? You hear rumors, you hear things, but again.
Sounds like Putin's Russia.
Go ahead, Don.
I didn't care about, Aaron just put his finger on one of the questions that I was wondering about, and I think that's the two things that we've been wanting on all of these issues were a specific and detailed response to our questions, even if the answer is no, to at least get the respect of having the issue formally addressed on the record, with the agency having to explain itself on the record as to why it's not going to do that. But specifically with Aaron's question, I mean, one of the things that we have asked about even before some of these changes came along was the lead levels used for the cleanup criteria, and what would happen, and we kept it going, well, wait for the rod. Well, what happens with all this residential cleanup that's been done and remediation that's been done? If the lead levels change, do they have to go back and, would they have to, is it conceivable that they would have to go back, recalculate and redo remediated locations?
Well, so keep in mind that the way that the remedy was designed here for the properties that are being cleaned up under the interim record of decision is that where a cleanup was done, they did a complete cleanup. So those places won't need to go back.
Yeah.
But theoretically,
Yeah.
if something changed, what we might see is that more properties would qualify
They would
for a
acquire
cleanup.
a bunch of new properties.
Right, right. But if you
Yeah.
think about it, those aren't going to be the highest risk properties will have been taken care of already because that change wouldn't really affect them.
Well, and we had a difference of opinion about that too, as you know.
Right. But theoretically, right?
Issue number 3.
Right,
yeah.
right. But so,
Actually, issue number 1,
right. But so specifically though, your on the record comments would be able to happen at that proposed plan stage,
Yeah.
right? And to answer your question, Eric, you know, looking at the remedial investigation and the feasibility study, those are gonna be an opportunity, not like, it's not the official record, meaning that it's gonna be incorporated into the record of decision. Those are opportunities though, for you to then raise some of your concerns, but that's a lot in preparation for, getting those concerns in place for the proposed plan. But the feasibility, the remedial investigation is gonna be an opportunity for you to look at it and say, hey, we're concerned about why this wasn't done, or this wasn't done, or that wasn't done, right? It may not be an official on the record place, but that's an opportunity for you to be able to ask those questions, get clarification, and potentially impact that proposed plan. So that is the important phase in there where what I've heard is that you want to have a say. And then the proposed plan is your place where what you're still not happy with, you can write those pieces of information and have that officially included in the public comment period.
Well, so where the CAG had written an official letter, questioning the 1/3 of properties that were tested that had decision units that would have, individual decision units that would have met cleanup criteria or more, and weren't cleaned up because the overall average wasn't. We submitted a letter about that and got back a sort of a non-responsive response. Is that part of the record? Or where does that fit?
So I'm assuming, and
Submitted?
EPA can better answer this, but I'm assuming that they keep it as part of their official site record.
Right.
But it won't necessarily be included in the record of decision.
So we need to resubmit the letter.
Yeah,
well,
there's no,
Right,
I mean, the reality is, we
Right.
just have to know the exact time frame,
Right.
so we can be prepared and send them our 10 letters.
And the other piece is that we don't know what the current state of affairs will be when they get to that proposed plan. So there may be some EPA changes, there may not be, right? So that's the piece to keep an eye on, is that remedial investigation feasibility study.
Real quick question.
And I think, did both of you have follow-up on that, or just you?
I'm good.
Okay.
Okay,
Here,
no,
go
I
ahead.
was telling Rick today,
Okay.
it's stupid. But, off the top of your head, comments that are received in the public comment process, what percentage actually have an effect of an adjustment to final run?
I cannot give you a percentage, but yeah, I would say that generally speaking, by the time you get to a proposed plan, it is rare for the agent, it is rare from what I've seen for the agency to see comments that end up making a big difference. Sometimes it makes,
Precisely why.
which is sometimes what, I mean, it makes tweaks sometimes,
Yeah.
right? And they have to answer things, and
Yeah.
sometimes information comes to light. But the truth is that this process is what keeps the information going.
I hear
And information at the remedial investigation feasibility stage is more likely to be impactful than the official.
I would say
comment.
your comment of rarely is an underwhelming statement. I mean, that's significantly less.
That's not an official comment, right?
No.
That's like me
But on the
saying,
other
from
hand,
what I've
there's-
seen.
Yeah,
Treat, that's the reason why we have been raising it all the way through this, because we thought we might have a better chance of affecting process if we raised it while it was going on.
Right, and things like your letter, right? I know that the last letter you wrote, the response was unsatisfactory, and was not satisfactory. Okay. But one of the things for you all to understand is that that letter, I am certain, caused a lot of discussion at EPA and the agency, right?
Sure.
And so they're thinking about it, right? They're figuring it out, they're looking at it, they know this is an issue. This is not a surprise to them that Aaron is saying, look, the county and city health department are concerned about lead levels, right? We're concerned about this. That is not a surprise to anybody. It's a government agency and change takes time. And so even if you don't necessarily feel like you're seeing an impact, I am confident that your efforts provide fuel for discussions, right? So I'm gonna just kind of go on just a little bit, right? So,
And treat time check.
yep, we're almost done.
Okay,
So,
that's great, that's really great.
So basically, this is the remedial design, remedial action phase. That's after the completion of the final design. We don't need to talk about that. That's a picture of Eric though. But he's unidentified.
Yeah, they thought they'd throw me under the bridge, they didn't do the presentation.
But so there
So I
is.
gave my presentation.
I bet.
I talked about the group.
During that RIFS, even though there's not an official public comment period, there are required community involvement activities. So conduct community interviews to solicit concerns, prepare a formal community involvement plan. That's often referred to as a CIP. The last one here was done in 2019. And so as the site is moving into a different project phase, with the beginning of the remedial investigation for OU1 commercial and OU2, EPA intends to look at doing an update to the community involvement plan next year, just so you know. And then they're supposed to establish and maintain a local information repository, which these days is mostly online, and the library. But there are some requirements for community involvement. There just isn't an official public comment period. Okay. And so these are all sort of blah, blah, blah. This is about the proposed plan, right? These are we'll share this presentation and you can read this. I'm not gonna read it to you. But there is a minimum of 30-day public comment period on that proposed plan. But again, the hope is that there's community involvement before then. So that's gonna be your chance to get things on the record. And EPA is required to, EPA is required to prepare a written response to what they deem significant comments. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't
No,
mean
it's
to,
okay.
but what I meant, I know it's not, is that the interviews to gain community perspective and the CIP are not.
Right, no, they're not.
Comment. They don't require a formal record or a formal
No.
response.
No, that was about the proposed plan. So the other.
And I realized that even as it jumped out of my mouth.
That's all good. I know we're a little short on time, but I really didn't want to cut short your discussion, the enforcement discussion. So, but the other piece is 5-year reviews. So we'll talk about this more. There was just a 5-year review. It wasn't it might not have felt like a big deal to you right now, but that's because you're in the middle of stuff still. So 5-year reviews, the biggest time that they have the biggest impact is when you're further down that line and things are sort of done. So let's say, worst case scenario, from what I've heard from you all, nothing happens to change on the lead policy, right? They go through, they get the record of decision, they do cleanup, they finish cleanup at OU1, they finish cleanup at OU2, you're still frustrated because you feel like the level should have been lower and there should have been more cleanup. Here we go, years after that, they change the lead policy. Well, every 5 years, EPA has to come in and make sure that the remedies that were selected are still safe and protective of human health and the environment. So that's the place where, say, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I'm just saying worst case scenario, lead policy changes, that's when it would be like, hey, policy's changed and things might start back up.
Dust it off and get it.
That's right. And so, so that's that process. But that's all I've got for y'all. I hope that helped answer some of your questions. And bring it back to the forefront.
Yeah.
I know Sabrina, I'm sorry. I appreciate it, I could feel it.
So, the fact, like, we've got new team members, the fact that you continually voice the same stuff, and you send a letter in, and we have it as part of our site record, it's this continual piece of like, you'd be a flippin' idiot if you didn't listen to people about this again, and this again, and this again, when we get to final rod, and we start talking to you about the final rod feasibility study and the possible alternatives, and how we can address that. Given CDC lowering their levels, that's what the state and the county health departments are matching up to. We're this outlier still. Well, how do we mesh and increase our protectiveness, even if we don't have a lead policy change? And it's this ongoing conversation. Okay, thanks for letting me.
Treat, it seemed like that was really helpful. It was helpful to me. I saw a lot of nodding heads and sense of, yeah.
Okay, it was helpful to me.
Can we just use the last 2 minutes real quick? So I did want to,
I was just gonna say, I also just wanted to voice, like, I know that y'all are frustrated with, like, the not knowing what's gonna happen with the lead policy, if it's gonna happen, when it's coming out. I just want, like, I am extremely frustrated with it, because if y'all remember, like, for the last 5 years of EPA, I've been a toxicologist assessor, so this is my wheelhouse, and I'm on 3 different work groups working on this policy that they told us would come out at the latest at the end of September, and it clearly has not come out. So I just want you to know, like, it's not just y'all that are frustrated, like, I'm extremely frustrated with the process as well, because it's also now we're, like, in this, like, holding pattern where we don't know what's going on, so we can't share the information with y'all, which is frustrating to us and to you guys. So it's just like, we're really not trying to withhold anything, but like, we can't tell you anything because headquarters still isn't telling us, and like, we're still addressing comments of what they're thinking they want to do, and then like, everyone just like goes in and hates it, and we have to like go in and change everything. So it's just like a very long-winded process, and the fact that like everyone knows that it's coming just makes it that much more frustrating of like, let the policy out and let us start to implement what needs to be done, if anything needs to be done. But I think with capturing that like absolute worst case scenario is that we get to the rod and we haven't changed the buildup levels because the policy for some reason still hasn't changed. That's where that 5-year review captures it, because we have to go back and look at that toxicological data and see like, has anything changed? And if so, we need to go back immediately and start changing things and cleaning up what needs to happen. So I don't know, I just want to like, we're frustrated.
And one additional piece on the data that we've got, where we've only, with our area weighted averaging, where we only had to do play area, garden area, if we were to ratchet down to a lower level, then we would revisit those properties and they would get a whole yard cleanup. So there's again, this sort of peeling off the layers of what might need to be done to increase protectiveness. And one piece of that could be, you know, area weighted averaging, one part of an alternative, a DU by DU piece, where it's above whatever the cleanup level is, as another alternative, and figuring that out. And that's where I see the ongoing conversation of how do we put the alternatives together? There's always going to be a no action possibility, but who knows really how that's going to play out given the flux that we're in right now. But the no action piece is always one alternative within our plan, along with the other alternatives.
See how it takes shape.
thank you, and thanks Sydney for what you shared. And I want to make sure everyone gets to go on time. I did want PDPHG, did you all want to give any kind of quick update on the September 19th, you had a lead awareness training? I think a lot of people came. Do you want to say a couple words about that? It's important.
We had a training.
We had a training, it happened.
It was successful.
We went back and finished the training.
Yeah, we had about 30 participants.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Did you get the spread of programs and agencies they were from, aside from the WIC folks that were in the room? I didn't, I have a list of participants in the room. They were, yeah. The others, I'm not sure by email who they were associated with.
Any other final announcements anyone has before we?
I was just gonna say, the OU2 video, is it okay if we move it to next time?
Oh, yeah.
It's like a 2-minute video, so if you guys wanna watch it now, we can, or we can save it for the
Let's put it
demo.
on the next, how about anyone who wants to stay and watch, but can we officially, for those who have to leave, watch it, okay? I mean, we have a number of topics on the agenda for upcoming meetings. I think, let me know if there are things that feel particularly pressing. Obviously, if anything comes up in the meantime that is pressing, we'll put on the agenda, but anything jump out to anyone is, if you look at the page 2 of the agenda, oh, sorry, it's on page 1, you're right, sorry. So, you know, we'll continue hearing updates on revitalization, on the assessment. We can talk about ICs, I know Treat had gathered some information you requested. We do just want to check in on bylaws real quick as a process, best practice before we go into next year, because it impacts meetings and engagement and things like that. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a really, really great night. Thanks for those online. Nice to see new faces. Leah, nice to have you here in person. And